Hi. Wow, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here again. I've been here for ngPoland last year and JS Poland, and I love Warsaw. I love the people, so thank you so much for having me here. So yeah, we're talking about dynamic components in Angular. And, well, here in ngPoland, that's a dynamic component, I think. A little bit about myself. I'm all Angular, trainer, consultant, and developer, GDE, and I think you probably heard about ngGirls, that I'm the founder, and we're going to have a great ngGirls workshop this Saturday as part of this conference. So thank you very much, ngPoland, and all the sponsors. Now, let's start with a demo. All right. Yeah, I can see it here. Does anyone here not recognize this screen? Okay, so I think we're in a good place. Here we go. Okay, so we're in the right conference. This is the main component that Angular CLI gives us, the main, the starting point, the demo that it gives us to start from. Is it a dynamic component? No. Well, you've seen it. You know what Angular CLI gives us. You've seen this root component, and no, it's not a dynamic component. But maybe if I do something like that, are these dynamic components? What? No? Well, look at this. They're very dynamic. Okay. But actually, dynamic components are more about how you use them and not about what they do. And as long as you can add them during runtime, and they're also connected to the whole application with dependency injection, and that they run and change detection is running on them, then they can be considered dynamic components. So this is a real application with the dynamic components. So you can see here that I'm just going to make some more space. I can add two types of components that I have here, and I'm adding them dynamically. I can add whichever I want, whenever I want, and they're not hard-coded there. Let's look at this note component. So within this whole thing is one component. So within the component, we can see that change detection works. So I can change the name of whoever said this quote, and I can also change whatever we said. Hello, ngPoland, right? So change detection works within the component, but also outside. So let me just refresh it so we can see two graphs here, okay? So two different components of graph, but their data comes from the surrounding. And if I change the data of one of them, then it is changed also to the other one. So it's a very simple demo, but that's just to show you what dynamic components can do. So let's go back to the slides, and let's talk a bit more about what makes a dynamic component. And to understand that, we'll start by talking about static components. Like Sebastian said, you're going to see some photos in this presentation, because, come on, that's such a huge screen. It really needs some great photos. So we're going to talk about how to do this with Angular, of course. Static components. Static components are components that are used in templates. We have their selector, and then we use them in a template of another component wherever we need them. We know them in development time. We write this template, and we use this component here. So it's in a fixed location wherever we want them. And you can say that it's kind of hard-coded, which is a good thing, okay? We will hard-code most of our components. It's okay. So in this case, you can see the app header, which is implemented somewhere, the tab set and tab that come from ngX Bootstrap, app note that I implemented in the app dashboard. So let's say this is our use case. We're developing a dashboard. So we're developing the framework for the dashboard. We're developing all the components. And our users are the ones who decide which components they want to see and what data they will plug into them. So we can create all different kinds of tables, graphs, gauges, and so on and so on. So maybe tens of types of components, or maybe hundreds of types of components. Okay, so a lot, so many like stars in the universe. So our code will, if we're using it as static components, our code will look something like this. We'll add all the components in the template, and then we'll get the user configuration, and which is probably an array. We'll iterate it on it with ngFor, and then we can use ngSwitch to see what type of component the user wants to have here. And for each type, we're now checking whether we want this component or something else. So here you can see only 5 components, and this code already looks very, very big and messy. And there's no way to split it into different files because it's all in one ngSwitch statement, and these are just the elements of the components themselves. That's how we use them. We can't destructure it anymore. So if we have hundreds of them, then it's a very, very, very big, long file. Do we like that? No. Okay. It's really great to see that you have some energy after lunch. That's also, really awesome. Another big problem with that, not only that this code is so long and not readable, is that all these components need to be known for the application, in runtime, in load time. All the code of these components will be shipped and compiled with the whole application. And we're talking about hundreds of components that our users will not need. The user will need maybe 5 types, 10 types, 20 types, but not all of them. So we don't want all this redundant code. So what can we do? Imagine that this whole template can be reduced to only one line like this. What do you say about that? Let's see how we can do that. Dynamic components. Dynamic components. So like I said, they can be added in runtime. We don't need to know in development time which component we're going to use. We can load the configuration from the server and then decide which component we're going to use. And we can lazy load these components. We don't have to ship all their code ahead of time. This is how you will use them. Like I said, this is the line that you will see in the template, and then we will have a reference to this line and create a component and add it to this place. So this is a placeholder. This is just the short version. We're going to walk through the code in a moment. So use cases, like I said, dashboards. Data-driven forms. You have some kind of data that includes dates, text, long text, emails, and so on, and you can dynamically create the component that you want to use in this form for this data. Pop-ups and modals. So this is from Angular material. So there are 2 dynamic components here. One is the modal itself, which you call imperatively in the code to open it, and it attaches it to the body. And another one is the component that you pass into the modal to be generated inside. Content management system. So you can create a system that reads some kind of text configuration, markdown files, and creates the components according to what you need there. So Angular I/O is a great example. Angular I/O actually reads the source code of Angular and puts it into components. And we can embed dynamic components into HTML components of native or even a different framework. So in this case, this is a framework that's written over a Backbone, and it gives us a way to create diagrams with SVG, and they allow you to put HTML on top of the SVG components. And if you want this HTML to be actual Angular components that are wired to all the dependency injection and change detection and just connected to your application, so you will create a dynamic component for that. And a great blog post about it is by Yuri Stromfolner. He had a different use case, but he explains how to do that and what to pay attention to in if you're talking about lifecycle hooks and stuff like that. Another example is when you have a content, well, this is an example of a worksheet that teachers can build for their students, and they can add different types of questions. And so each question will be dynamically added to the worksheet, but another thing that we can do here is let other developers develop the questions, new questions for us, and we can use them in our code and load them also. And this will be called plugin components, and you can see a talk and also read blog posts by Maxim NG Wizard Koretsky about how to do this. Okay, and another great picture. How do we do that? How do components instantiate in Angular? So the regular way, the static components, we declare them inside an ng module, and we also use them inside a template. So when Angular compiles the application, it finds these places, and it knows that it has to create a component factory for these components, and wherever it is needed, Angular will create an instance, which is actually a component view, which includes a DOM node and the component instance itself, and will render it to the DOM wherever we need it. But if we don't put this component in the template, but we still want to get the component factory for it, we need to put it in entry components in the ng module. And then Angular will create not only the factory, but also a host factory, which is what will stand between the component and the DOM node that we attach it to. Okay, so this will be the connection to our application, to the surrounding. Now, the app root is actually also an entry component because it is attached to the DOM, well, where the Angular application doesn't run. It's the regular HTML. And so whatever is in Bootstrap component is also automatically in the entry components. Okay. So how do we actually write these dynamic components and use them? So again, like I said, we have a placeholder in our template, and we get a reference to it as a view child and get it as a view container ref. In the constructor, we pass the injector and the component factory resolver that will help us find this the component factory of the component that we want. Then, whenever we want to add this component, we resolve the factory with the injector. Sorry, not with the injector, with knowing the component class that we want, and then we create an instance with the injector, so the injection, it is connected to the injection tree. And then we insert it on the DOM node that we want. But this is actually the long version, and there's a shorter version where we don't need, sorry, I think I crossed out the wrong line. We don't need the injector. We do need the component factory resolver. And we just create the component directly on the container ref. Now we can pass inputs and bind to outputs on this component, but we don't have its template. So we don't do this with the regular syntax. We just have the instance of the component. So whatever is public there, we can directly access. So we can pass data directly to the members, and we can subscribe to the events. The events are the outputs. They are just observables that we can subscribe to. So you have to notice that change detection does work, but if you're relying on ng changes inside this component, it will not recognize changes that are passed in these members. But if you're running ng do check, if you're using, this lifecycle hook, then it will react to the changes. Okay. You can also pass projection content into these components. That's the slide for that. And how do you do that? That's the second parameter of component factory create, or the fourth parameter of the create component that we have on the view container ref. Okay, but it's still not 100% dynamic. It can't be really lazy loaded because we need to know the component class ahead of time when we resolve its factory. So we're not totally happy, not just a little bit. So we'll talk about dynamic components, or plugin components, you can call them, or lazy loaded components. So how do we do that? They're unknown in compile time, and we can lazy load them. So first thing, we can lazy, first thing, we need to separate them into a different ng module, and this ng module will be lazily loaded because we can't yet lazy load just a component. It has to be wrapped in an ng module. And we have to build it separately, and then we can use the loader, which comes with the Angular ng module factory loader, to lazy load it when we want, and it only receives a string, so we don't need any component instance, any code shipped in this, added to this file ahead of time. This is actually what happens in the router, and the router uses this loader. So if you're using the router, you can just go ahead and inject the loader, and if not, then you will need to provide it specifically. Now, if you're using Webpack to build your project and you want to build this as a separate chunk, then you can add to lazy modules in the angular.json file which paths you want to build separately. That's the one. Okay. And so we lazy load the module whenever we need it, but it's still not 100% dynamic, because to get the component factory, we still need to know the type of the component, the class itself. So we need to import it into this code. So this is not so great, but we have a solution for that using providers. So this is the ng module of the lazy loaded module, the component that has the component. We provide a known token, something that we know ahead of time in our application. And in this case, it's the string widgets. And then we pass to it use value, and we're just using the component that is configured inside this ng module. And if you want to be a bit more safe, then you can create an interface for this component and and also use an injection token instead of the string. And this injection token will be used both on your application and in the ng module itself. Okay, so we have this, and now we can use the injector to get this token and to get its content, which is the component that we want. And ta-da! We have a dynamic plugin component. What do you say? Have we succeeded in our mission? Now we don't need to know all this code to import it into the file. We can import it only like in a different, we can put all of it in a different bundle. So I think this is a success. Yeah. Someone else is really happy here. Okay, just a few more notes. You should consider when you're doing this loading dynamically modules with ES modules. If you want to build a whole library as a vendor chunk, like without a surrounding application, without anything that's bootstrapped, then you have in Angular JSON vendor chunk, change it to true. You can use also web components and Angular elements to also add dynamically components, but then they will act like web components. And looking forward for Ivy, where this whole thing will be much, much easier. A few more resources. So the first two I have mentioned. The third one, Manfred, who is coming to speak right after me. Hey, Manfred. Has also written a great demo that I really want to show you quickly. And you can get it from his GitHub, and you can add a regular component, a lazy-loaded component, and an external web component. And going back to the sides, so check this out, and that's it. Thank you very much, and you can keep in touch. Thank you.